What's up, everybody? Today we're going to be looking at Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. Unsurprisingly, this book is about the famous artist and engineer Leonardo da Vinci. So Leonardo da Vinci lived in the late 14 and early 1500s, and he was a court artisan and engineer to some kings and different rich people in the time. He's most famously known for the Mona Lisa and the painting of the Last Supper, but unknown to many people, he was also an astrologist, a geologist, architect, civil engineer, mechanical engineer. His list of accomplishments, but also his list of interests, is unbelievable and quite shocking. So as I was reading through this biography, I was really struck by how much he was into. You think Leonardo da Vinci, and yes, you do think Renaissance man, maybe a philosopher, understands math and law. Leonardo da Vinci was the quintessential Renaissance man. He had extreme interests and was very knowledgeable in so many different fields. If you were to actually ask Leonardo what he did, he would probably tell you that he was a military engineer. That is what he was most interested in. And if you look at the 8,000 pages of notes from his that people have discovered, it's found that he focused mainly on military engineering. He had crazy crossbows. And the most interesting thing for me was that a lot of his inventions actually have been proven today to work. So even though they were only drawings and ideas in his mind, they actually were based in reality and were oftentimes correct and worked. So he was actually born to a family of notaries, but he was a bastard. So he didn't end up becoming a notary. He ended up at the age of 15 going to a family friend who was a painter and starting to work in his paint shop. At this time period in Italy, being a painter was a normal profession. So he worked with this painter for a little while, but very quickly people realized that he was good. And so he ended up, throughout his lifetime, bouncing around from different kings and rulers and painting and being an engineer for them. I'm not going to bore you guys with the details of the linear progression of his life. I'm going to talk more about the things that you can take from Leonardo da Vinci and apply into your own life. As I always say, reading the book is far better than any summary that I can give you, but I will be able to point to some key takeaways that you can apply to your life that allowed Leonardo to become one of the most successful and most well-known individuals in history. As the title of this video suggests, Leonardo da Vinci was a creative genius. But he was not a creative genius in the ways of Einstein or Newton or Galileo, where their mind power was almost unimaginable. Leonardo was definitely smart, but his abilities came mostly from his extreme observation. He spent his entire life observing the way things worked. He actually was not that heavy of a reader until later in his life, so he approached many problems with no baseline of understanding. So he would completely dissect them and break them down and use these incredible powers of observation that he had to understand something in a new, brilliant way. The first key takeaway from Leonardo da Vinci's life is to be good at a few complementary skills. See, Leonardo created two of the most famous paintings ever, the Last Supper and the Mona Lisa. But if you look at these paintings, neither of them could have been achieved just by him painting. His work as an engineer, his work in optics, his work in anatomy allowed him to understand the way that humans moved in a way that no other painter did or has since. And so he created these lifelike paintings that could convey emotions. See, he would dissect people after they had passed away and try to understand how the brain worked. What was very interesting about Leonardo is he was about 200 years ahead of his time in geology, astrology, anatomy, even some kinds of math and calculus, geometry, light, and even some skills in engineering and physics. But he didn't post these in a book. He combined them in his mind, and then it allowed him to paint these exquisite paintings such as the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. The way you can apply this in your life is by being really good at a few different skills that combine to create an even better skill. And what I mean by this is, for example, I'm an engineer, and I've spent some time working on public speaking, because I realize that the combination of strong people skills and the way that an engineer thinks would allow me to start a business and be able to not only communicate with clients well, but to also deliver really good products. Another way to do this would be combining computer skills with another degree such as law or medicine and automating some of those things, creating a niche for yourself. By combining and being really good at 2 separate or 3 or 4 different skills, you combine them into something that allows you to be way more successful in the combination of those skills than you would be at any individual skill. There's a very small chance that you're going to be so good at basketball that you're going to be the #1 NBA player. But there's a much higher chance that you can be really good at basketball, really good with computers, and really good at teaching and be able to create basketball instructional videos. You understand what I'm saying? That you can mix topics together and to create your own individual better topic. A second key takeaway was that Leonardo da Vinci had a diverse group of intellectually stimulating friends. So basically, he had successful friends that also drove him to success. But he enjoyed spending time with them because the things that Leonardo would like to talk about, such as math and physics, they also liked to talk about. And so when you're talking about optics and dimensions and things, find people who are interested in the same intellectual topics as you and get around them so you can develop those skills and become a better, smarter person. The third key takeaway, which might sound quite similar to the first, is develop the ability to make cross-disciplinary analogies. And what I mean by this is Leonardo would make all these interesting analogies between humans and the world, or between trees and the nervous system. And this allowed him to understand things in a way that most people couldn't. And having been reading a lot myself over the past year or so, I've kind of noticed these ideas pop up, where I'll read a book about how the mind works, and then I'll read a book about communication, and I'll notice connections that allow me to understand both of them more deeply than I would have if I had simply read either book. And this comes even more in handy when you're dealing with actual experiences and not necessarily reading, but the ability to make analogies from something else that you understand very well into something new allows you to understand that new topic better. And so as you build up this huge mental repertoire of skills, you're able to understand things much more quickly, because although everything is very different and the skills in the arenas that Leonardo worked in were very different, there's always some connections that you can make that allow you to further yourself and to learn new things more quickly. The fourth key takeaway is to be endlessly curious. Leonardo never lost that childlike curiosity that kids have, and that allowed him to propel through his life and always be interested in new things. So he was always engaged in his work and always creating great things, because he was mixing that, intellectual strength of an adult with the childlike curiosity of, a child. And therefore he was able to attack things energetically and enthusiastically, but also with wisdom and poise. In whatever you're doing, allow yourself to be endlessly curious. Find the things that interest you and focus on those. This ties very well into the fifth key takeaway, which is good distractions versus bad distractions. So the idea that there are good distractions. I've noticed this a bit in my life, because oftentimes I'll be focused on a project, let's say school, and I'll have something else come up, and public speaking is a good example of this. I spent a good amount of time last semester focused on public speaking, developing speeches, and it wasn't beneficial to my schoolwork. I'm in engineering school. It wasn't beneficial to my job, but yet it was an interesting passion that has allowed me to explore other arenas, allowed me to meet some really new cool people, and has altogether developed me to be a better person. And allow yourself these beneficial distractions. Leonardo was incredibly, incredibly wonderful at this. He would become distracted by interesting topics and would dive down these rabbit holes, often leaving projects unfinished. And at first I thought, this is a bad character trait. But then later he would come back to these projects, maybe a long time in the future, and end up finishing them when he was passionate about them. So by only working on things that he was passionate about at that moment, he was always passionate about what he was doing, and therefore his final product was so much better, because it might have been 5 years of work on this painting, but it was spread out and allowed him to become better and grow. And that's how he developed paintings like the Mona Lisa. I believe he worked on the Mona Lisa for over 10 years throughout different time periods, adding a little here, going back and doing a little here, and it allowed him to create one of the most famous pieces of art ever created. Another takeaway from Leonardo's life is to do it for yourself. This may sound a little odd, and I'm not in any way saying that you shouldn't do things to help other people. I think that's one of the best ways to motivate yourself and to live a happy, successful life. But Leonardo da Vinci was never in it for the money, and he was never in it for the fame. He had so many notes and things that if he had published into books, he could have been rich and famous. And there were so many rich rulers who wanted him to do paintings of them or of their wives or whatever, and he never did that. The Mona Lisa, one of the most famous artworks ever, is painted of a woman who's not famous, And although her husband was fairly rich, Leonardo never gave the painting to them and received the money, because he was in it for the true art of creation, to create something truly great. So by focusing on creation and not on the rewards you get from creating, you end up creating stuff that is far, far better and far more interesting and stimulating for generations and generations afterward. Had Leonardo worked on things he wasn't passionate about just for the money, he would have been rich, but he would not be the household name that he is today, hundreds of years after he died. And I think the last thing that you can take away from Leonardo's life, and something that culminates it in the Mona Lisa that I've spoke about so many times, is the idea that learning is never wasted. Leonardo da Vinci has 8,000 pages from his notebooks that have been discovered, and it's considered that that's about 25% of the full knowledge and stuff that he wrote down. The large majority of this is not focused on painting. As I mentioned, engineering, architecture, hydraulics, and all these other topics that he wanted to explore for himself. He was actually talked about by the French king as someone who knew more than any other person and was wiser than any other man. He learned for fun, and oftentimes some people have criticized him by saying, if he had just focused on painting, he would have been without a doubt the greatest painter ever. But the amazing biographer who wrote this book disagrees with that, and I have to agree with him in saying that Leonardo's learning was never wasted. He could have never painted the Mona Lisa without the understanding that he had. There's waters and trees and plants and rocks in the background that he painted better than anyone else because he understood them better than anyone else. He understood the details of how her clothes looked and was able to paint them better than anyone else. He understood how humans being moved and was able to portray that movement through his artwork. And then most importantly, he understood how the facial muscles and the eyes portrayed what the mind was thinking, and did that so well in the Mona Lisa that it has been talked about for hundreds and hundreds of years afterwards. My point with this is that learning is never wasted. If you had to take one thing away from the amazing, wonderful life of Leonardo da Vinci, it's focus on what you care about, what you're passionate about, and don't allow others' opinions to dictate what you will do. Yes, listen to people and take their advice, and sometimes their advice will be correct, but focus on what you want to do, what energizes you, what makes you wake up ready to go in the morning, and you will end up creating far better things and living a far happier, more fulfilled, and more impactful life than if you allow others to decide what you're going to do. Leonardo da Vinci didn't allow kings and rulers and rich people to boss him around, and because of that, he pursued what he wanted to do for him and for the people he cared about, and in the end became one of the most famous people ever to live. So be a little bit more like Leonardo da Vinci and care a little bit less what people are telling you. This book was truly wonderful. It was very well written. The author, Walter Isaacson, has written a few different biographies, which I'm excited to dive into. Steve Jobs, Benjamin Franklin, a couple of other super famous people. If you're interested in a very curious man who explored life in a way unlike just about anyone else who's ever lived, you should definitely check out this biography. You're going to get an interesting look into a man who wrote in his notebook, "Look at the tongue of the woodpecker," and things like that all the time. He loved life, and he was endlessly curious about humans, nature, and how the two worked together. Again, thank you guys so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. As I always say, if reading is knowledge and knowledge is power, then reading is power. You guys have a wonderful day. Like, subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.